Great.
All right, everybody, welcome in. I am privileged this week to have Simon Shortt with me. He is part of this. He is the Simon Shortt podcast. He studies the Steelers a lot, the NFL in general. Tonight, we're going to be talking about the Steelers, so I'm very happy to have him on here on Sports and Money with Ben Parker. Simon, how you doing tonight, man?
Man, I'm doing great, Ben. I'm doing fantastic. I'm excited to be here, excited to talk Steelers, ready to talk ball with you. So let's get to it, man. Let's do it.
Hey, right off the bat, I'm going to change the agenda. I'm sorry,
Perfect.
man.
Love it. That's excellent.
Hey, without even discussing specifics, we already talked about the end of the era for Roethlisberger last time I talked to you. How, as a Steelers fan right now, how do you feel right now? What's your emotions like? Is it pumped up excitement, or is it, I don't really know what the future holds? What do you feel right now as a Steelers fan?
It's scary. It's a little nerve-wracking. My dad, I'm a Steeler fan because my dad grew up a Steeler fan starting in the 70s. So I've heard all the great stories. In the last couple of years, when Ben's career started to end, I started finally hearing all the horror stories of the 80s and the 90s quarterbacks and everybody that came through. And I think when you and I last talked, I actually had that list of names to you, and I've forcefully put it out of my mind because I don't want to think about it. If you ask me just in a vacuum in this moment how I'm feeling about this upcoming season, and that's kind of what we're going to get into in a bit, I'm excited. If you were to ask me just about my general outlook for fandom for what this next era is going to look like, I am very nervous because it can go very badly very quickly. But yeah, today I'm excited. If I think big picture, maybe not so excited.
And that makes sense. I want to start off asking you with this about Mike Tomlin. He's the established guy there in Pittsburgh. The old general manager is kind of on his way to retirement. They haven't announced the new general manager yet. What's the current power structure there? Who's got the final to say on these decisions here in Pittsburgh as we're moving pretty rapidly through the offseason?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, it's hard to tell from the outside looking in, but as you definitely know, every team is different. Pittsburgh is owned obviously by the Rooney family. It's been that way since they were established. And I would say the very final decision still comes down to a member of the Rooney family. So right now, the acting chairperson of the Steelers is Art Rooney II. And he pretty much sets the tone. Last offseason, when the season ended, he said, we have to fix the running game. The Steelers drafted Najee Harris in the first round. This year, he set the tone for we need to help Najee in the running game and we need to stop the run. We'll get into some of those moves, but clearly they've revamped the offensive line. They've added some linebacker help. So I think really the buck starts and stops with him in terms of this is what you guys have to do. And then any big things, they'll come across my desk at the end. But Kevin Colbert, been the GM since the year 2000. He is still running the show from the day-to-day aspect. Oh. Mike Tomlin, he's out there on the pro day tours now. He was at the Senior Bowl, at the Combine. He obviously has a huge, huge hand in it in terms of making those decisions. And, for an example with the draft, Colbert and Tomlin, anywhere that they've been at a pro day since at least 2010. 2010 is kind of the last one that we're not so sure about. But in those last 12 drafts, their first round pick has been at a pro day that Colbert and or Tomlin have attended. So that's a good little Easter egg for fans and media members to kind of follow, because one of those two guys is going to see their first round pick at one of these upcoming pro days.
That's fascinating. I'm sure in general that's probably not unusual, but for it to be that consistent every single season is probably a little bit more of an extreme. So that's fascinating stuff, and that's why we have you on here, man. Okay, that's why we got you on here. All right, Steelers.
Hey, that's what I try to do.
There's so much to talk about. We're going to try to hit it all tonight, but I want to start with Mitchell Trubisky. But when I last talked to you, I don't know, 2 or 3 weeks ago now, Trubisky was one of the names that you were at least willing to entertain if the price was right. I like the price. We can have a lot of discussion about Trubisky himself, but the price is 2 years, $14.2 million. You're never going to get a better quarterback for the money unless you draft a rookie. So, but how do you feel overall about bringing Trubisky in right now?
I'm excited for Mitch. I feel really, really good about it. I think especially because of that price, like you mentioned, if, what was reported, even days before he got signed to the Steelers had come to fruition and he was making $10 to $15 million a season on a long-term deal, that would have scared the mess out of me. $7 million for Mitch Trubisky to upgrade over Mason Rudolph. That sounds like a great season to me. And for 2 years, the Steelers, if they're going to get an external free agent, it's usually going to be about 2 years. They'll get to see if this is a guy they want to build around long-term or not. I think the really interesting thing about Trubisky is in 2017, when he was making his pro day and pre-draft circuit and everything, Kevin Colbert was one of only 2 GMs at his pro day. So that was 2017, a year before they drafted Mason Rudolph. So when Mason Rudolph was drafted in 2018, it was this whole thing. They said, oh, we had a first round grade on him. It was very clear they were thinking this could be the heir to Ben. Well, now the guy that Colbert apparently really, really liked the year before, who he couldn't go get, has fallen into their laps. So I know a lot of people are framing it as, a bridge quarterback and, for that money, it makes sense. And yeah, I mean, for what he's shown us to this point, he doesn't necessarily deserve any thoughts above being a decent bridge quarterback.
Right.
But I have a sneaky suspicion in the back of my mind that the Steelers might be thinking a lot bigger for Mitch.
That's one reason I like this deal. Let's suppose it is nothing more than a bridge quarterback. And the numbers aren't the same in both years, but let's just go with the $7 million a season for now. Yeah. If that's all you get the average bridge quarterback for $7 million, you've lost nothing here. You have nothing to lose on this deal. For the price, you couldn't get anything better. The numbers we were hearing before all this happened were higher on Trubisky than that. A little bit higher, not a lot. But I thought they got an excellent deal here. I was a little surprised they got him at that low. What do you really expect out of Trubisky, regardless of finances? Can he be the guy we saw in Chicago the first year, or is he going to land somewhere in between what we saw in his Chicago years?
So I think we definitely can get a version of that Pro Bowl Trubisky, which again, Pro Bowls are a little bit inflated sometimes, especially with quarterback. But I think for what this offense probably wants to be, he's going to be a better fit. The 2022 Mitch Trubisky is going to be a slightly better fit for a Matt Canada offense than 2021 Ben Roethlisberger. Right. Do I think the play of Mitch Trubisky will necessarily even net out that much better than Ben last year? That still remains to be seen. But I think for what the offense wants to do and the direction the team wants to go in on the field, Trubisky can give you a little bit more. It's just about that he tries to give too much more and then it backfires on him. But he can get out of the pocket. He can scramble a little bit. I like the idea of him rolling out on bootlegs because that was something Ben did not really do or even want to do in the last few years of his career. If Ben was moving around, it was haphazard and it wasn't on purpose, which was how he thrived for a long time, but it didn't look so good at the end. So I think we'll see Mitch running some bootlegs, scrambling around a little bit. And when all else fails, he can tuck it in and run for, 8 to 10 yards and get down and, live to see another day.
And that's another reason I do like this deal. Again, even if Trubisky turns out to just be the bridge, not the future, you've got a guy who I think is an upgrade over Roethlisberger 21. He should have better arm strength. He's definitely more mobile. And while he may not be quite as experienced or sharp or as accurate as Roethlisberger, I think you have a lot more tools to work with over the next season. And you've got Deontay Johnson and Chase Claypool to throw to. I can see this actually being an upgrade for less money than what you were paying Roethlisberger.
Yep. And it'll be a big year for offensive coordinator Matt Canada, who fans wanted gone after last year. And, I was one of them. There was a lot of play calls I didn't like. There was a lot of game plans I didn't like, but this is going to be the year to prove that he's worth his salt. This is a quarterback that's going to fit your type of system. And while, by himself, I might not trust Mitch even this year, like I said, compared to Ben of last year, more in terms of final drive, 2 minutes, go make a play, win the game, which we saw Ben do still last year, like you said, because of that football IQ, because of that experience.
Right.
This is going to be a game plan of 60 minutes that Mitch should be able to execute. So now it'll be about, is that game plan, is that play calling actually good or not? And I think that's what we'll find out this year.
Yeah. So, all right. So I think we're in agreement that this is a good move for Pittsburgh, even if it doesn't turn out to be anything more than a bridge. But we both think, hey, they've got a chance this year to compete. And when you're losing a guy like Roethlisberger, I think it's all you can ask for is a chance to compete. It brings me to the offensive line. And this was a trouble spot for Pittsburgh last year. I'm going to name 3 names to give you the starting point, and then you tell me where we go from there. One is the re-signing, I think the re-signing of Okorafor, right? 3 years, $29.3 million total. They bring in, if I'm correct, guard James Daniels on a 3-year deal for $26.5 million. And then center Mason Cole, 3 years, $15.8 million. Take your time. You go in any direction you want here, but these 3 names, starting point, what do you think?
And we have 2 hours for this podcast, right? I can go that
right,
long talking about the offensive line. And I'm so excited about this offensive line. So, of course, the first move that was made was re-signing Chuks Okorafor. He was the right tackle for the Steelers the last 2 years. Coming off of his rookie deal, he was actually drafted. He played left tackle primarily out of Western Michigan. So in his first 2 years, he was kind of the swing tackle backup player for both spots. In year 3, he was supposed to play. Actually, he lost the right tackle position battle in camp to Zach Banner, who the team just recently cut. Banner goes down in week 1 in the 4th quarter of the game. Okorafor comes in, and he's a solid right tackle. He's a pretty good NFL player. He's going to be in this league for a long time because he's good. Now, the issue for him last year, let's rewind a little more. 2 years ago when he was the young buck on that offensive line, they still had Villanueva, they still had Pouncey. It was fine. He's your 4th or 5th best offensive lineman. That's where you want to be. Last year, Villanueva's gone, Pouncey's gone, DeCastro's gone. All of a sudden, he's the most experienced guy on that offensive line in a Pittsburgh uniform. Probably from a talent standpoint, comparable to Trey Turner, who was the veteran at that point dealing with injuries. He was arguably their best offensive lineman last year, and that's not where you want to be. This deal for Chuks is a really good one. It's very easy to get out of. You mentioned $29.3 million. 9.3 of that is a signing bonus this year. So it'll be split over the next remaining years of the contract. It's very easy to get out each step of the way if they want to. Based on everything they did otherwise, this is a good move. When it happened just by itself, I kind of rolled my eyes and sighed and said, oh, man, it's going to be status quo. They didn't even look at other tackles. They're not even going to mess with, getting one early in the draft. They're going to give this guy $10 million a year. I'm expecting Trey Turner back. I'm expecting Kendrick Green to start again. And I'm feeling very, very nervous when Chuks comes in. Then the news comes across the wire that the Steelers have signed Mason Cole. I don't know who that guy is. I was a little nervous right at the beginning. I looked into it. I was actually on my drive. So I was talking to Ben about this earlier, but I moved across the country from New Mexico to Virginia, and I'm driving. My buddy looks him up for me. He starts telling me about him. He's like, okay, he was a 3rd-round pick 4 years ago. I was like, okay, that's, a little bit of pedigree. The Steelers like that. He's like, oh, he came from Michigan. Okay. Steelers really like Michigan. So they probably had some interest in him pre-draft. They like those big schools. He's now the 4th player from Michigan on the team as of right now. Okay. He has experience at center and guard. Okay. That's cool. Like, let's see what goes on. He's 6'4", 300 pounds. That's really good. I like that. Big thing with Kendrick Green this year was undersized, not great technique at center. And when you do have those 2 things combined in the AFC North, you're going to get plowed. And that's what happened. Then I start getting nervous. Oh, well, he played 3 years for the Cardinals, then got traded to the Vikings for a 6th-round pick. That's not usually good. The last year of your rookie deal, you get traded for 3 rounds lower than what you were drafted at. That's not a good sign. Well, I think he only played like 7 games for the Vikings last year. He dealt with some injuries he rotated in. So again, those 2 things now, still not feeling great. But I'm at least like, well, okay, at the very least, this guy has guard capability. He has starting experience already in the league, like 3 years of starting experience, but, mixed in at different positions. Yeah, last year, we'll just kind of write it off. Of course, he was traded from the Cardinals because they got Rodney Hudson. So, like, it's not like they just cut him outright. They had a good player coming in. Okay, maybe there's something here. They could play him at guard. Maybe he'll compete with Green at center. Maybe they'll move Green to guard. Okay, let's see what happens. And then the big name comes in. So James Daniels comes in, and that's when everything kind of came to fruition in terms of imagining this offensive line. James Daniels is a really high-level player, is still very young. He's going to be 24 still when the Steelers start the season. He's an offensive lineman out of Iowa or Iowa State, one of those Midwestern schools where you want to get a lineman from. He has NFL and college experience at all 3 interior positions. He was primarily a center in college, but he played his last 2 years in the NFL at right guard, but he's played center and left guard for the Bears. Now, my very first thought about James Daniels was, of course, we know the Bears offensive line was not very good last year. So when you hear, oh, he's the best guy from Chicago, it's like, how good is that best guy? Kind of the Chuks standpoint. But then you look back into it, you look at what the Bears were dealing with, you kind of check out what their line looked like, check out some of the games. Their issue was mainly at tackle. They were playing Jason Peters at left tackle, and they had a rotating kind of cast at right tackle because of injuries. Right. James Daniels is a good player. He's got great size. He's about 6'4", a little over 300 pounds, 34-inch arms, which is nice. He can move, he can pull, he can get to the second level. He's physical, he's aggressive. He has all the traits the Steelers are looking for in their offensive linemen. The biggest thing is his talent level, where he's at immediately elevates everybody around him. I think we talked about this on the last one, but I'm huge when it comes to the offensive line of it's the biggest position in football where it's more about cohesion than individual talent. So, yeah, It's nice to have a Quentin Nelson. It's nice to have a Zach Martin, a real standout kind of player who can do everything, play all 5 positions, yada, yada. It's more important to not have any weak links. James Daniel, when you put him at, let's say, hypothetical offensive line as of right now, if we were to look at it, returners, Dan Moore Jr. at left tackle, Kevin Dotson, returner at left guard. Then let's pencil in Mason Cole at center, pencil in James Daniels at right guard, pencil in Chuks Okorafor at right tackle. Now it's looking a lot better, because even if you only have average grades on Chuks Okorafor and Mason Cole, you put a guy like James Daniels in between them, that's immediately going to make both guys look a lot better. James Daniels, like I said, he's big, he's physical, he's aggressive. He's still only 24 years old. He's going to keep getting better. Depending on where they go in the draft, you could still see him moving around and knowing that he can play any position. And maybe, let's say Mason Cole's the guy you're most worried about. If the Steelers go get a guard in round 1, Daniels can play center. Let's try it out. They have a lot of flexibility when it comes to this offensive line as it stands right now. And I think the biggest thing is they're in position to not have any major liabilities. And that's the most important thing. So with each move that got made in free agency, those 3 guys, I felt, with Chuks, a little bit better with Mason Cole, and then James Daniels comes in, and that's kind of like when it's all kind of realized, you see what they were working towards, and it makes me feel a lot better about the prospects of the offensive line and, the prospects of Najee Harris having a healthy and successful season in year 2.
I think you're totally right about the offensive line in general, without even speaking to the Steelers' specific moves. In the end, there was a day, you go back to the 90s and any time prior to that, if you didn't have a top 5, top 8 offensive line, you weren't going to win anything. And that was true of the Cowboys and the 49ers in the 90s. That was true of the 49ers and the other teams in the 80s. That was true of the Steelers in the 70s. No offensive line, you win nothing. These days, you don't have to be dominant if you want to win year in and year out, you just need a decent offensive line that can flex a little bit, communicate well, no major weak spots. And that seems to be what the Steelers are putting together, at least for this offseason. And it's typical Steelers, right? Nothing splashy. A lot of even NFL fans wouldn't know these names necessarily, but it's typical smart Steelers moves where they're not signing huge 5-year deals that take 2 or 3 years to get out of. And where if the guy is injured, now you have that cap space sitting on the bench for the rest of the season. I like these moves. And you mentioned the guys who are likely to start. I want to ask you about Trey Turner and Kendrick Green. Turner's a free agent. I would assume he's not coming back. And then Green, I believe, is still on the team. But what about those two guys? What's the story for them now?
Yeah, so Kendrick Green, I think, is going to be in a position where he should have been last year, which is he's going to be depth interior play on the offensive line. Kevin Colbert has actually said postseason, hey, we maybe misevaluated Kendrick Green and put him in a poor position. Not so much saying like, oh, that player's no good, but we, as the Steelers and the scouting department, didn't necessarily think he was going to struggle as much as he did. Between him not playing center in college, him being an underclassman coming out, him being undersized and not having great technique, that's just whirlwind of things for him to deal with to now be the center coming in for Marquise Pouncey retiring. I'm not sure where their evaluation came from. I couldn't even begin to tell you what they thought they saw, other than a guy who looks kind of like Marquise Pouncey and is very physical. If Kendrick Green had come in this year and maybe done what Dotson had done last year, which was, okay, he's going to play left and right guard. He's going to come off the bench, sub for injuries or, COVID related things, what have you. And he played 4 or 5 games, maybe 1 or 2 at left guard, 1 or 2 at right guard, maybe even 1 game at center. We probably would have had a lot better feeling of him. But instead for him to be thrown into 17 games was going to be 17 games, 15 games as the starting center when he'd never done it before and doesn't have great technique was not really a great equation. But he's going to be on this team. He's on a rookie deal. They're not going to move him or anything like that. They're going to keep him on, see if he can develop. I'm sure they're still going to frame the center position as an open competition. And we'll see what happens in the draft, but I would expect him to still be competing for center. But, Kevin Dotson, for as much as I like him, he's only played like 14, 15 NFL games because of injuries. And, his rookie year, he wasn't a starter. So there's no reason that you have to pen him in at left guard. Kendrick Green could easily be in that spot. Kendrick Green could easily be at right guard and James Daniels could go to center. There's still an opportunity for him. And I still expect him to have a chance to compete, but I do not expect him to win a job. So swing interior depth on the offensive line. Trey Turner was a pleasant surprise this year. Was obviously a Pro Bowl guard for all those years with the Panthers. Had 1 year where he was on the Chargers, had a lot of injuries that he dealt with, and he was slowly dealing with more and more injuries in his Panthers career. And the Steelers kind of just signed him on a whim in the middle of training camp because David DeCastro came to camp injured, unexpectedly, essentially retired. I don't know if even paperwork's actually been filed. I think that dude just walked away and didn't look back. That's kind of his style. He wasn't really for the glitz and the glam, but Trey Turner was just kind of like a desperate Hail Mary, honestly. And the fact that he played in 16 or 17 games, had a couple, little injuries during games, but nothing big that held him out, and was overall like a fairly decent offensive lineman for them, was already a pleasant surprise. And he also walked in and was a leader. With all those young guys, he had a rookie Kendrick Green next to him. Chukwueze Okorafor was on his right. Kevin Dotson didn't have a lot of NFL starts. Rookie left tackle Dan Moore Jr. That locker room and that offensive line room especially really respected and listened to Trey Turner, and he, gained the respect of Ben Roethlisberger and Mike Tomlin during the year as well. So I commend him for what he did. I hope he finds, a good spot coming up in free agency. But I think with Kendrick Green, Mason Cole, even the young guy, J.C. Hassenauer, got his exclusive rights deal signed by the Steelers. I'm sure he's going to explore other options where he has a chance to compete for a starting spot. Would I be surprised or opposed to him getting a vet minimum deal to come in and be a backup and still be a leader? No. Do I expect it though? Not so much.
Right. Safe to say, when we look at, we'll try to move on here in a second, but when we look at the quarterback position combined with the offensive line additions, it's got to be a better combination than last year. Trubisky should be more mobile and should have the bigger arm than what you had last year. And the offensive line should be more competitive at the interior spots and should be more consistent across the board, even if they're not great. Fair to say that you should have a better situation at that quarterback offensive line combo than you did last year, actually.
Yeah, definitely. And, you kind of mentioned it, not only the new guys, but Dan Moore Jr. at left tackle. He was supposed to be the fourth offensive tackle for the Steelers last year. It was going to be Chooks at left tackle, Banner at right tackle, Joe Haig, who they signed as the swing guy on game day. Dan Moore was supposed to be in street clothes on Sundays, and he got thrust really right in the mid, like right at the beginning of preseason into you're the starting left tackle, big guy as a day 3, 4th round pick. Good luck to you. And he got a lot better as the season went on. I'm expecting him to be a lot better. And yeah, those additions should really just kind of help the whole thing kind of hum and go.
These are the kinds of names. It's so easy in the NFL, and it's a mistake, but it's what we do. It's so easy to look at everything that Denver's doing and the Raiders are doing and the Chargers are doing. And 2 years ago, we looked at everything that the Browns were doing. And we just think, wow, star power equals more wins. And that can be the case, but it's not always. What you've actually done is invested more cap space into fewer people. And what the Steelers are doing right now is names that a lot of people either don't know or don't care about. And they may have actually, as weird as it sounds, they may have actually improved at quarterback and offensive line with names that people don't know or don't care about.
Yeah, Pittsburgh is always built through the draft. That's the way they want to do it. I mean, even before Kevin Colbert. So I'm expecting even when he's gone for it to still be that way, because that's what Mike Tomlin has gotten used to. That's what the Rooneys expect. And I'm very, very happy that they've done what they've done. Lots of good moves to fill holes in the roster. That's been a big thing for Kevin Colbert. Even if there's a position he wants to draft, he wants to sign a veteran free agent first, so he doesn't feel like he has to draft a big name. So you get the Mitch Trubisky, so you don't have to send 3 first-round picks to trade up for Malik Willis or something like that. It's worked to this point. The Super Bowls speak for themselves, and Colbert's 2 Super Bowls that he has in his 22 years speak for themselves. Definitely don't expect it to change, and I'm glad it hasn't.
We're not going to get deep in the draft talk because that's not the focus here, but I can't help asking. I think we're all certain the Steelers are not going to trade up in the draft. But if the Steelers are sitting there at number 20 and Pickett or Willis drops to that spot, is it still out of the bounds of reason that they wouldn't draft him? Is that still on the board? Is that still on the table?
I think it definitely could be. I mean, we talked about what Colbert and Tomlin's track records of pro days are. Today was Monday, the 21st. Pitt had their pro day. Kenny Pickett's their quarterback. Colbert and Tomlin were both there. So I think he's definitely on the board. Like you said, I don't necessarily see them feeling like they have to trade up now because of Mitch, because that comfort they seem to have with him. And with Mitch, they signed him 30 minutes into free agency. This wasn't, I know some people media-wise are kind of framing it as like, look at all these people that are making all these moves for quarterback, and the Steelers settled for Mitch Trubisky. No, the Steelers went and got Mitch Trubisky. They wanted him. It was 12:30 p.m., whatever time zone I was in at that point, and they got Mitch Trubisky. So, yeah, I don't think they're going to trade up. Again, it won't shock me if they do, because maybe in their eyes they say, well, we filled all these other holes. We can use these draft picks now instead of needing a middle linebacker, instead of needing a corner. Now we can use these picks to trade up and get one. So it won't necessarily surprise me. But to your point, yeah, if at 20 you've got an offensive lineman, a cornerback, and one of those quarterbacks on the board, I wouldn't be surprised if they went quarterback.
It'll be fascinating to see. And we'll talk more about the draft, hopefully, with you again as the draft gets closer.
Absolutely.
Let's move, if you don't mind, to defensive back. I'm going to name three more names here at cornerback.
Great.
I think one of them is a re-signing, and the other two of them are re-signings, and the other one I can't remember. I think maybe a new signing. Arthur Mallette, I think, is a re-sign at 2 years, 3.8. Levi Wallace, I believe, is a re-signing at 2 years, $8 million. And then Aquila Witherspoon. Are those three names? Tell me who's significant, who's not, what you like, what you don't like.
Yeah, definitely. So I'll start with Mallette. Mallette, I like. Arthur Mallette is a good depth piece. For the Steelers last year, he was kind of the poor man's Mike Hilton replacement as that nickel corner who isn't great in coverage, but is a very physical player. He's a good run defender, a good tackler. They sent him on blitzes a couple times last year. When the year started, I'd say by week 3, he was established as their nickel corner. So anytime they went in sub package, he was their inside man. As the year went along, they kind of shifted his role to, okay, if they went into their sub package, if they played nickel defense on first or second down or an obvious run situation, he was on the field. If it was a pass situation, he was off the field in favor of Trey Norwood, who was a rookie last year. I believe Trey Norwood is kind of being groomed to be that nickel guy. He's not nearly as physical or a good tackler as Mallette is. So I think Mallette still has potential for a role, but his signing I see as he's coming into camp. He's going to compete for a position. He's still going to have to earn a spot on the team. Luckily for him, he also got some special teams experience with the team last year as a gunner. I never specifically saw him on kick return coverage, but I'm sure he's out there because of his physicality. And Pittsburgh really cares about that, being a good special teamer and being someone who has experience with the special teams in Pittsburgh is really, really important to them. So I think he's going to definitely compete for a spot. I think he's going to have a great chance to make the roster, but we'll see. Aquila Witherspoon is the second re-signing. He was the third guy of those three to be brought back or brought in. He's a long-rangey playmaker cover corner. He only really played in 9 games for the Steelers last year. He had a 10th game, but that I don't really count that one. It was in week 2. It was for an injured Joe Hayden. They just kind of threw him out there. And it didn't go well. But his 9 real games where I'd say he was like really kind of on the moving train were good. He was productive. He had 3 interceptions in those 9 games. He ended up leading the team in interceptions in just 9 games as a real full-time player. And that's kind of his thing. In basketball, we would say he's a heat check guy or a streaky guy where he, can have 5 games where he has 3 picks and then 5 games where, he looks bad. And that's also kind of the nature of corner.
Right.
That's just how it goes. But I was happy with the Witherspoon re-signing because he is kind of that playmaker that they don't really have without him. Because with Minkah Fitzpatrick at free safety, it's easy to not throw in his direction. But if you put Aquila Witherspoon on your team's best receiver, you're going to have to throw in his direction. And, he very well could pick it off. He's not as physical, which is, I won't say not as physical. He's not as good at being physical as most Steelers corners usually are, which made when they traded for him last year a little strange. They traded their 5th round pick either this year or next year, I forget which one, for him last year during camp. That also kind of made his onboarding to the team a little tricky. He kind of came in midway through camp, had to kind of find a package to put him in. Because he's not a great tackler, he wasn't going to find a role on special teams like we just talked about with Mallette. He hasn't really played in the nickel because, again, he's not that physical of a guy. So they had to find a spot for him at outside corner. He has a chance to be a little bit like this year's Chris Wormley on the defensive line, where the Steelers traded a 5th-round pick for him. He doesn't really produce in the year he was traded for, but he gets a 2-year contract and they say, hey, you owe us some good play, essentially. And Chris Wormley had a career year last year, and I'm hoping the same goes for Witherspoon this year and he can make some plays. The last corner, Levi Wallace, was the external signing. He came from the Buffalo Bills. He's kind of the mirror opposite of Witherspoon, but in the same position. So he's also an outside corner, long, rangy guy, but he's very physical. He's a very good run defender, very good tackler. I saw a stat, and it made me think of you actually, because we talked about Charvarius Ward last time we talked also, but it was basically the top 3 corners in terms of tackle percentage in run defensive situations as an outside corner. So very specific stat. So take it with a grain of salt. But it was Charvarius Ward, number 1, who like has like a 75% like tackle rate or something like that. Something just crazy. Joe Hayden, Steelers outside corner, number 2. Levi Wallace, number 3. So Levi Wallace is going to be out there. I expect him to be a starter out on the outside because he's going to be able to stop the run. He's not great in man coverage. I think because of his play time in Buffalo, he's kind of better in those zone packages, which Pittsburgh went to more last year. Pittsburgh usually, at least in this most recent era, prefers to be man cover corners on the outside, cover one with Minka up top and just kind of play press coverage, play tough, and then get after the quarterback. Last year, because they took a step back in their defensive backfield with losing Steven Nelson and Mike Hilton, they went to more of a zone defense. So maybe that's kind of still in their plan. But all 3 guys I really like, all 3 guys I think bring a lot to the team. I've always liked Levi Wallace whenever I see him play, just those big, long corners. And that's something the Steelers really like. They try to go get those guys. 2 other guys on the roster, Justin Lane was a 3rd-round pick because he's like 6'2", and he just hasn't really worked out. James Pierre was a starter for a couple weeks last year. Again, just didn't really work out, but they want those bigger, longer corners, and that's what Witherspoon and Wallace definitely bring.
Let me ask you this, and we didn't prep for this question, so if you don't want to go too in-depth, that's fine. But from a scheme standpoint, and this is a predicament that a lot of NFL teams face. If you have a lot of defensive backs who are inconsistent, or they're okay at times and not good at others, they're physical sometimes and not. When you have a set of defensive backs who aren't great in one-on-ones, do you still like to keep them? You personally, do you like to keep them in one-on-one press just so you stay aggressive as a defense? Or do you like to back off in zone? And that's what a lot of NFL teams do, but realizing we're going to give up a lot of free yardage when we do that, because these quarterbacks and OCs all know how to break up zones pretty easy, especially by just flooding the flats with running backs. Where do you fall in that category? What do you do?
That's a great question. I mean, the easy answer and almost a cop-out answer is it depends on personnel. Right. So I think for the team this year that they're putting together, we still have to see a couple moves. We still have to see a couple things that's going to happen, primarily what's going to happen at strong safety. That's going to be a big part of that. But I like the idea of saying we're just going to stick to man. We're going to stick to what we do. And, if we get beat, we get beat. Jamar Chase had 3 touchdowns on James Pierre last year, one of those weeks. And James Pierre got benched after that, and the Steelers started playing zone. And that's just kind of what happens. If we were in a different division, I think you could say, hey, we're going to stick to what we have. We know we have Minka back there to cover up a lot, even if it's not everything. Let's see what happens. This division now has Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase, T. Higgins on one team that they'll see twice a year. Lamar Jackson and Hollywood Brown and Mark Andrews, Deshaun Watson, Amari Cooper, David Ogunjobi, and whoever else they get to play wide receiver. This team is going to have 6 games next year where they're facing all pro, not just Pro Bowl, but all pro talent at quarterback and receiver. I'm very, very hopeful that based on the talent they have on the roster and the talent they're going to see, that they go to some sort of interesting kind of zone. There's a new defensive coordinator running the show. Mike Tomlin is a defensive-minded guy, and he's very pass coverage oriented. I know that their competitiveness would lead them to want to stick to man, but I also hope that they kind of see the writing on the wall and say, okay, well, let's at least do some really creative things in zone where and they already do this, 2 years ago when they, at the peak of this defensive backfield, they were doing things where people were like switching up coverages and Minka was dropping down and Hayden was dropping back to free safety, stuff like that, doing different disguises. Hopefully they can get back to that now, kind of getting some more veterans back in there. and having another year with Aquila in the building, having another year with Trey Norwood, guys who are rangy and playmakers and can do some things. Long-winded answer to your question, but I'd like to see this team kind of do some more zone like last year, but just mix it up a little bit, get creative.
That's fascinating. We could talk scheme all night. I'm going to toss another name at you. Linebacker Miles Jack, 2 years, $16 million. How do we feel about the deal and about the position now, that linebacker as a whole?
Miles Jack was the biggest surprise for me of any of these signings, because like we said earlier, James Daniels, to that point, and maybe even including Miles Jack, might be the best player that the Steelers have signed. But he's not a big name. He was a young guy on a rookie deal out in Chicago playing offensive line. Not a lot of people know. I didn't know who that guy was until at certain points this year. Miles Jack is a name that people know. That's a name that my high school friends who are Steeler fans but aren't digging in kind of like we're doing now, that they know that guy. So, and he played in Jacksonville. That's a bad team. So, he's good. I'm really excited about Miles Jack because he's such a talent upgrade at what they had at the position last year. And he gives them the flexibility to still do a lot. The deal for the money and the deal for the player don't stop them from doing anything else with the linebacker position. They could stay right where they're at. They could go get another free agent and do something early in the draft. They could do anything still. Miles Jack is that good of a player. As a player, Miles Jack is what the A+ level of Devin Bush would have been, could have been, however you want to frame it. He's an elite cover guy. He can get deep. He can cover tight ends and man down the seam, which is exactly what Bush was supposed to be able to do. I think Bush still has that ability. It's just he doesn't have great technique for it. But Miles Jack is supposed to be what they were looking for in Devin Bush. When Ryan Shazier, what was injured and paralyzed and left this team, he left a huge void, not only as a person and a leader, but as that kind of playmaking, pass coverage linebacker, sideline to sideline linebacker that they just have not filled since he's been gone. And it's been a long time. Miles Jack can do that. Miles Jack is also a big and physical enough guy that if you need to play him next to Bush, he can do that. That's not necessarily my preference. I would still like them to go get a thumper in the second round of this draft, and a guy that can cover up offensive linemen and let Jack still play kind of free and shoot gaps and use his speed and his laser focus to the ball kind of thing. But if he needs to get physical and get into the trenches, he can definitely do that. The contract I love. I'm just continuously shocked by the guys they get on these contracts. Because similar to some of the offensive linemen we talked about, and even Mitch Trubisky, this allows you to do a lot of things. You can have him on this 2-year contract where if he plays great and he's everything you needed in a linebacker as your number one guy, and Bush kind of disappoints, extend Miles Jack because he'll be under contract. So you're not going to have to fight free agency again, and you can just give him an extension over the next summer, and he can be your middle linebacker for the next 5 years. If he plays poorly and Bush actually has a surprisingly good season, you still have that security where Jack is under contract while you try to work something out with Bush, because Bush is going into his 4th year this year. The Steelers, I don't know when the deadline is, sometime before the summer, where they'd have to extend him his 5th-year option as a first-round linebacker. That's probably not going to happen. They probably don't want to lock themselves into paying Bush $10 million next year if he has another down year. So if they say, hey, you have to play out your 4th year and see what happens, and he defies expectations and has a great year, then you can cut Jack and pay Bush. You can let Bush walk. You can keep Jack. You can extend Jack. You can do whatever. So I think it's a great contract. I think it's a really good player. And I think it still gives them the opportunity to attack linebacker in the draft, because linebacker was their worst position group, in my opinion, of all of last year. Now, that's a lot to say considering the offensive line, but Pittsburgh has succeeded to a fair amount with a poor offensive line in the past. And, I'm sure I'm going to catch a lot of crap for this, but the Steelers are about defense, and the Steelers defense is about middle linebackers. And I mean, I grew up watching James Ferrier and Larry Foote, and then it got moved to Lawrence Timmons, and then it got moved to Shazier. This team has always had good middle linebackers, even just in the time that I've been watching, let alone if we go back to, the 70s and 80s linebackers. Fixing the middle linebacker group it was imperative for this team, and a big reason why their run defense was so bad last year. That I think automatically gets fixed just with Myles Jack. And I think, like I said, they still have the room to do more to the position.
I hope I'm pronouncing this name right. I called him a wide receiver, but he's really a kick returner. Gunnar Olszewski. They just have signed him, I think, within the last day or two. What does he mean to the special teams? Do we see him at all at wide receiver? What do we look at? What do we look at him there with the Steelers for him?
Gunnar, I'm really excited for. He was an all-pro return man 2 years ago for the Patriots. Steelers lost Ray McLeod, their kick and punt returner, in free agency. He went to the 49ers. I think Gunnar can immediately come in and keep it moving at kick return and punt return. Ray was the first guy we had start those positions for 2 consecutive years since Rod Woodson in the early 90s. So I think Gunnar can come in right away and continue that pace and hopefully be there a couple of years and make some big plays. I do not expect to see him at wide receiver, but I also didn't expect to see Ray at wide receiver this year. So we'll see what happens. But Gunnar also brings value in the coverage units as well. I think he had like 7 special teams tackles last year. So there's an extra element to his kick and punt return ability that Ray didn't have. And maybe that kind of overtakes any kind of value you get at wide receiver. But he had like 9 catches in the last 3 years. So I'm hoping he's not out there too much trying to catch balls.
These are the moves. The Steelers have made them for a long time. The Patriots have done the same. The Chiefs have done quite a bit of it as well. The Packers, to a degree, maybe not quite so much the Packers, but the franchises that stay towards the top, it's impossible to be Super Bowl level every year. But the franchises who stay toward the top, they make these moves year in and year out. Every once in a while, they'll pull off the big one, but they just make these quiet assassin moves every single year. And the poor franchises that stay at the bottom, it's almost as if they'd never figure it out. And they just keep throwing money at top players and almost never dig themselves out of the hole that they're in on the bottom. So I like what the Steelers do here. It's typical Steelers stuff. I mean, it's just classic Steelers moves, right?
Absolutely. I mean, and it's funny because to me, this feels like the biggest, because it's the biggest year in free agency I've seen the Steelers make. The last big contract they gave to an external free agent was Mike Mitchell, a safety, and they gave him like a 5-year, $25 million contract. They gave him like $5 million a year. And that's one guy. And I can't even think about the guy before that. So, with the big names like the James Daniels and the Myles Jacks, like that's one thing that's completely new. Steeler fans are freaking out about it. But the Gunners, the Levis, bringing back the Witherspoons, guys like that, those are the nice moves that you kind of expect year in and year out. I will say, you mentioned the Patriots and Bill Belichick. The fact that they let Gunnar walk in free agency makes me a little nervous. What do they know that I'm going to find out? But at the same time, the team lost a really good kick and punt returner, and they're able to just bring one right back in who I think at worst will be just as good. And that's something that's a huge value, and Pittsburgh knows it because they were without that for a few years.
What are some names of some people that either the Steelers have already lost or we're pretty sure they're going to lose, that it's going to hurt? You're going to miss these guys. Whether or not you replace them, these are the names we're going to hurt to see go.
Well, it's TBD, but strong safety Tyrell Edmonds was a guy that I've really been pounding the table for. I actually have an article that I wrote a long time ago that just because defensive backfield is about chemistry, very similar to offensive line. It's really nice to just have that chemistry. And Edmonds is just that kind of like steady Eddie guy who can play in the box, as a good run defender, has good chemistry with Minkah Fitzpatrick. He's not very good in pass coverage. He doesn't make a lot of plays on the ball. I mean, even like fumbles wise or anything like that. He's just not a big playmaker, but he doesn't get beat a whole lot. We'll see what happens. It's kind of looking like, and this might just be Steeler fans getting all excited, but it looks like if they don't have Edmonds, it's because they've upgraded. You know, Tyrann Mathieu, the Honey Badger, is a big name in Steelers Twitter right now, but there's still some other guys that are out there. So we'll kind of see what happens there. Edmonds could very well come back tomorrow. He could resign and everything could be fine. The guy for me that's going to be tough is, I know you wanted to talk about, is my guy Juju Smith-Schuster, a wide receiver who signed with the Kansas City Chiefs. That guy just plays like a Steeler, man. I mean, that guy is tough as nails. Steeler fans will never forget the hit on Vontaze Burfict in the Bengals game after he knocked out Antonio Brown. And for all the TikToks and fun loving and dancing that he did, that guy was tough as a you know what. And it's hard to see him go, but at the same time, I think it is what's best for him in his career as a football player and trying to get the most money possible and, you know, take care of himself. So that one's going to be a bummer, but you know, I'm excited to see whatever he does, because catching pass from Patrick Mahomes is going to be pretty cool.
I'm going to ask you two questions about Smith-Schuster. One, I didn't even mention to you before. He signed a 1-year deal at $3.25 million. Without even getting into the reasons why, did that not the number itself not just shock you a little bit? I know he missed most of the year with an injury, but $3.25 million is nothing for a guy who might light you up next year if he's healthy. Did that number not surprise you, only from a Steelers standpoint and from the fact that nobody else in the NFL offered even a little bit more, like $5 or $6 million?
Yeah, I'm really shocked. Last year he took a 1-year deal to come back to Pittsburgh for essentially $8 million. And it was the lowest offer he actually got. He got bigger offers from the Ravens and the Chiefs last year, funnily enough, and didn't take them. So obviously, yeah, he's looking at something much, much lower this year. I'm very surprised from a person who's watched his career standpoint, but I guess at the same time, if you think last year he was worth 8 to 10 million, and then he had a pretty devastating shoulder separation injury in week 5 last year. His production didn't look like it was going to be any better than the year before, and now he's basically coming off of this injury. I guess it makes sense that it's a little lower. I know there's a lot of interesting things in terms of the incentives involved on that deal, so I'd be interested to see in terms of the likelihood things, because I'm sure a lot of it is related to just snap count and starts and games played. So it'd be very interesting to see what those thresholds are and what that money comes to at the end of the season. I don't know if we'll ever actually know that. But yeah, 3 point, whatever. I was thinking he'd get at least that 5-6 number. So it was pretty surprising it was that low.
Well, and this is the question we did prep for. And when I did the Chiefs video, just literally before we got on here together, I told them to tune in and listen to Simon Shortt to get the answer on this. Okay. So a lot of people are going to be waiting for this answer.
Can't wait.
When Smith-Schuster first broke in with the Steelers, boy, he lit up everybody. I mean, 1,000 yards, I think, receiving, and I don't remember all the other numbers, but well, he lit everybody up. Ever since then, we've seen a decline in yards per catch and yards per target, which could be a number of different things. And I guess my question to you today is, was all of that due to Roethlisberger's eroding arm strength? Was it due to the league figuring out Smith-Schuster or something else? Or are we looking at a combination of things? Why would those numbers go down pretty consistently for each year in Smith-Schuster's career?
Yeah, so Juju's second year in the league was 2018. That was his Pro Bowl season. That was the last year he played with Ben Roethlisberger and Antonio Brown. So there's that was the theory, right? Oh, he doesn't have Antonio Brown on the other side. The next year, 2019, Antonio Brown is traded. Ben plays 1.25 game and then is knocked out for the rest of the season. Juju then plays the rest of 2019 with Mason Rudolph and Duck Hodges as his quarterbacks. Yes, an NFL quarterback's name was Duck, if you did not remember. So obviously that's when his numbers dipped. That's where the basement of his numbers were. And, even then his yards per reception were higher than they were these last 2 years. I mean, that's a crude stat because, that could include yards after catch. You never know. But that was still 13 yards per reception he made. So that's pretty good. But his overall volume was still much, much lower. He was down 900 yards and 4 touchdowns from the year before with Ben in his Pro Bowl season. That's all quarterback play. When you go from Ben Roethlisberger, who was still basically at the peak of his powers in 2018, to Mason Rudolph in his second year, and Duck Hodges, who's in the Canadian Football League now, that's not a great sign. Fast forward to 2020, Juju has his production goes back up. Ben's first year back, he has a solid year. It goes up from where it was in 2019, but like you said, very clearly not nearly where it was his first 2 years in the league. Now, your question is why? Fans aren't 100% sure. The biggest thing, the easiest thing to point out to is to protect Ben. Now, was it because Ben couldn't throw deep or just because they were worried that if he held the ball too long, he'd get hurt again? We'll never really be sure of that. Ben will write a book in 5 years and he'll say, the team's mandated that he had to only throw less than 10 yards and he couldn't do anything about it. Or he'd lose something crazy. I don't know. But Juju, no. So number one, I think it was to protect Ben, whether it was because he couldn't throw deep or just because they felt he shouldn't. That's number one. Number two, Juju has a remarkable skill set for being close to the line of scrimmage. I guarantee if in those first couple games of 2020, he didn't do well with hot reads or option routes or catching over the middle or run blocking, they would have said, okay, let's try something else. You go back to the outside. But to his credit and also probably his disservice, Juju, that is, he's really good over the middle. He's really good at blocking. He's a tough son of a gun and will make any catch over the middle. And him and Ben just had a great chemistry. Ben knew he could throw it into him in tight windows and Juju would come up with it. He knew he could throw the ball 100 miles an hour at Juju with a safety right behind him, and that safety wasn't picking it off. So I think a lot of it was also just Ben's trust in Juju and saying, I need that guy close to me if we're going to do this. Is a little Heath Miller-like in just the way that Ben just when, everything broke down would just find Juju. And again, whether it was arm strength, whether it was scheme, that just happened to be as close to the line of scrimmage as possible for Juju in 2020. And they stuck with that game plan in 2021 for those first 5 games before Juju ultimately got hurt and didn't really play the rest of the season.
A lot of stuff there to look at. I know there is. Last couple of questions I'm going to ask you for the night. When you look at this roster, and again, it's fluid. We haven't even got close to the draft yet. There's still more free agent stuff to come. But as of right now, what's the biggest position group, biggest hole on the roster that they still have to do something about? No matter what, they've got to jump on this, either in the draft or in free agency.
Well, from a literal standpoint, the biggest hole is strong safety. There's not a strong safety on the roster right now. Technically, Miles Killebrew is one, but he's a special teams guy. You don't actually want him to be out there as your strong safety. So in reality, it's strong safety. Like I said, though, I'm expecting them to sign somebody because they don't want to go into a draft with a true hole. And I doubt they even want to start a rookie at strong safety when they've clearly made all this investment to have a veteran group in the backfield. That's literally the number one thing, though. Number two would be slot receiver, replacing Juju, figuring out who's going to fill that role. They have a couple in-house options with guys who were on the practice squad last year, but again, no big names. In terms of, okay, if you were to say on the depth chart, let's say we sign a veteran strong safety, let's say we sign another veteran receiver, not big name guys, but just so we have a clean slate and we can say, where's the number one position we should improve? To me, it'd still be middle linebacker. Put somebody next to Miles Jack who can cover up offensive linemen and let Jack really get into the backfield and make plays in coverage. Get a guy who can, be an effective blitzer, because Bush and Schobert were not that last year. They did not get behind the line of scrimmage. They get eaten up on blocks way too easily. That, from a talent standpoint, just improving the position, that's still what I want to see. But in terms of literally what are the biggest holes on this depth chart, it's strong safety, number one by a mile, and then slot receiver.
when you, and this I think will be the final question of the night. We can talk all night, but I don't think anybody's going to listen that long. What if you were to, and again, this is all fluid. All the teams are going to change a lot. As of right now, though, what do you feel about next season? Do you feel like the Steelers are still just kind of in that 7-8 win ballpark? Do you feel like it could be worse? Do you feel like they have a legit shot at the playoffs? What's your range right now based on what you've seen out of the Steelers so far?
Well, I'd love to say that all of these shrewd moves and impressive signings make me 100% confident they'll be at least another 10-win team again. I also have to be very realistic and say I have watched Mitch Trubisky play quarterback in the NFL, and as recently as just a couple of years ago with the Bears, there's a chance we see 2020 Mitch Trubisky, although he made the playoffs that year, and they win 6 games. There's a chance of that. I'm not going to sit here and pretend that that's not the case. My gut, though, does tell me that that's not going to happen. Mike Tomlin's never had a losing season. I know it's annoying to hear if you're not a Steeler fan, but we're going to keep saying it. He's never had one. Doug Hodges and Mason Rudolph won 8 games, guys. Mitch Trubisky can win 8 or 9 games. This is the best offensive line this team has had in, I'd say, 2-3 years at least, since the end of, the Goon Squad when they got down up in age. This defense is going to be much, much better. They were still an average pass defense last year, and they won't be anywhere near the bottom 2 run defense they were last year. So I'm expecting this defense to get back to top 5, top 10 standard. I'm expecting them to be able to run the offense they want to run. And more importantly than Mitch Trubisky, this offensive line to me says Najee Harris is going to be healthy and have a even more productive year. He was still productive raw stats wise, but efficiency numbers were really bad for him last year because he was constantly getting, his first touch behind the line of scrimmage from a defensive player. At the very least, this is going to be, I think, an average offense instead of a bad offense, and a very good defense instead of an average defense, which to me screams, I think you can still get to that 10-win range. I would not be surprised by 10, 11 wins. And with the AFC North, even as talented as some of those other teams are, they have to all play each other, and they can all just beat the crap out of each other. And I would not be surprised if Pittsburgh still ended up on top of the division.
Simon, it's been fun. If people want to get more of what you got, where do they find you at? What are the different places that they can find your content?
Well, they're going to get the After Dark version of this podcast. We're going to go back and talk more about the offensive line for another 2 hours because I could keep going. You guys can find all my work on phantomsports.com. We recently rebranded, so be sure to check that out. It's really, really cool design. Check me out on there. I actually just came out with my Steelers mock draft 5.0 today. That's up on the site. It's up on my Twitter feed. I'm at Simon Says 63. Follow the Simon Shortt podcast on Apple and Spotify. Don't worry, I'm going to beg Ben to come back on a couple more times before the draft. And yeah, man, hey, I appreciate you. This was a lot of fun. It was a nice little therapy session for me, talk about the Steelers. And I appreciate you, man.
Simon, it has been a pleasure. We will sign off. We were going to have you on again at some point, probably before the draft as well.
Absolutely.
I'm looking for a way to stop this recording. Simon, thank you so much.
Thanks, Ben. Appreciate you.
All right. Goodbye, everyone. See you next time.